Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to Chart Chat, round 27. Before I get into the introductions and the whole reason we're doing this, want you to know where and how you can chat with us. Looking to join the conversation, you'll see the live chat panel below or to the right of the stream. Maybe you'll need to click the little three dots or a hamburger icon to pop it out. But by the way, the mandate that you have to tell us where you are uh, joining us from, that has been lifted. It is now optional, but we'd love to know where you are calling in from. In any case, that's where you can find this, and please chat with us as we're presenting. Let me stop sharing this at the moment. And hi, my name is Steve Wexler. I'm the founder, principal, and sole employee of Data Revelations. I am one of the three authors of the Big Book of Dashboards and the author of The Big Picture. And with that, let me hand things over to my fellow author, Jeff Schaefer.
Hello all, Jeff Schaefer here, Chief Operating Officer at Unifund and Recovery Decision Science in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I am also adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati, where I teach data visualization. Andy?
Hi, everybody. My name's Andy Cotgreave. I'm co-author of the Big Book of Dashboards too. In fact, check this out, everybody. Today, I received the Chinese version of the Big Book of Dashboards. So anybody who's fluent in Chinese, could you do our proofreading? Well, it's a bit too late. Anyway, Big Book of Dashboards. We're into our 6th year of that. I'm also technical evangelist at Tableau. 10 and a half years there, still going strong. So great to be here today. Amanda, over to you.
Hello, my name is Amanda McCulloch. I am the Executive Director for the Data Visualization Society and work as the Acting Director for AI and Analytics at Excella, based here in Washington, D.C. Very excited to join my co-hosts here today, where we get to go ahead and unpack some interesting chart redesigns. So, Steve, tell everyone what they'll be hearing about today during Chart Chat.
I will. I just want to explain the whole reason for Chart Chat. It's not chit chat. It's certainly not church chat, but it was to resurrect the discussions, the debates, and passionate parlays back and forth amongst myself, Andy, and Jeff Schaefer around the Big Book of Dashboards. And we realized this is really valuable stuff. So we want you to join us as we discuss and debate these things. And we have the good and intelligence to realize we should invite the voice of reason and sanity into the fold and have Amanda join us. And we've now been doing this, well, it started with me and Jeff, then Andy, then Amanda. I think we're in our 4th year with this. In any case, with that in mind, let me share the agenda for today, which is people have said, hey, we'd like to see you make stuff over. And Andy Cotgreave has found an interesting chart, and I'll let him cue it up, and then live you will see each of us present how we would make this over. We have not seen each other's work yet, which makes me a little nervous. We'll then look at some interesting charts that came from Viktor Orban, the premier of Hungary, and some interesting charts that came from Joe Biden at the White House, and they are unfortunately remarkably similar. We'll discuss that. We will also share some thoughts on Iron Viz. It is Iron Viz season in the Tableau world. And is this a good thing? And should you participate? And a little spoiler alert, yeah, I think so. And time permits, want to share some thoughts on the Data Visualization Society's Outlier conference, and one presentation in particular from Robert Kosara, which is brilliant. And as soon as these things become available, you should watch any and all of them, but particularly this session, because I'm a little concerned about something being taken out of context. Well, with that, I'm going to hand things over to Andy, who's going to lead the Veroni Makeover.
Thank you, Steve. So we talked about this chart a little bit in the past. We have talked about Voronois many times in Chart Chat. Traditionally a geographical way of visualizing data, but now sort of reclaimed or no, differently claimed as an area-based chart. This chart, you don't need to be a data literate expert to know what it's showing. It's showing the US military spending compared to the rest of the world. And boom, the primary thing you see is that US is way bigger than the rest of the top 10. But it's circular. It's a Voronoi. That's not perhaps the best way to visualize data. So we're all going to make it over and share them now. But rather than me go first, I'm going to spin a wheel to find out who goes first. All right. This is going to be thrilling. Let's see who's going to show theirs first. Is it going to be Amanda? That now you all literally think that is a fix, don't you? That is not a fix. It is not.
I just didn't want you to have to go through changing that screen share more than once, Andy.
Wheelofnames.com. If you can go and see how that was fixed, it wasn't fixed. Right. Okay. So I'll go first. I didn't want to go first. Okay. So it's a Voronoi, right? First thing I thought as I was thinking, how do I remake, is just focus on the circle. I think when you look at the key headline, the subtitle, it says the US spends more on its military than the rest of the top 10 highest spending countries combined. That was their editorial focus. I suspect you all are looking at the diameter line and assuming that bisects the circle. Well, I've just overlaid a circle with a diameter line. That splits the circle in two. And it's just, the more I looked at this Voronoi, it just fascinated me that it's, because the US is just over 50% or is over 50% of the top 10 spend, that line is not in the middle. But I assume most people just look at it and kind of snap it into the center line. So as you can see, the black line is where it is and a little bit more. Anyway, so that started to inform my remake. I'm going to show some of the iterations. I had to start with a pie, just if nothing else, to annoy Steve. But this is a part to whole relationship. So here's a pie, but when you're making this decision, I'm like, do you want the big slice of the US on the left, on the right, or the left? On the right or the left? I had no idea. Don't really know. But what's interesting, at least with a pie, you can see that the big slice is over 50%. So that is kind of nice. We're going to talk about Robert Cassara at the end if we have time. But if you go and read some of his research on pies, some of the most recent research suggests that we don't actually use angle to decipher the size of pi. So I'm increasingly not convinced that the Voronoi is just as effective as showing the parts of the whole and how they relate to each other. So the pi was a dead end. So we put that one into the bin. I wanted to go for a stacked bar. But of course, one cannot just do a stacked bar without asking and answering 1,000 questions. First of all, which way do you stack the bars? Do you go for the unstable Jenga sorting with a big top heavy one, or China rock solid foundation at the bottom? I kind of decided I'd stick with China at the bottom. I preferred that stability. Then what I'm not going to show you is all the countless iterations I went through on the labels. Which bit should be bold? Which bit did I want to be bold? What colors, etc. I noticed Daniel says, of course we read angles in the comments. Welcome to the show, Daniel. Go and check out Robert's research, his academic papers, because it might be the case we don't. And I'm not going to say we don't or we do, but certainly some of his research indicates that the angle, us reading angles, is perhaps has come from something that nobody actually tested it. So worth checking out. Anyway, countless iterations of labels. Right, what did we do next? Then I thought color schemes. We've got to think about color. Do I want discrete or continuous? In the end, I like this one because the editorial choice was to tell a story about the US. So that's an alert color red. Everything else is just a gradient color to slightly de-emphasize something but keep it visually appealing. The next decision is, which way do you orient this? Is it horizontal? Is it vertical? I don't know. 2 days ago, as I was preparing these slides, I decided horizontal was nice because you get to read the text and the bars in a single one horizontal movement of the eye. At this point, I'm like, what about the rest of the world? I looked at it, but I'm sticking with the editorial story from the Visual Capitalist. So I was sticking with just the top 10, but it is important at some point to consider the rest of the measure. My next one was like, I quite like the original color encoding because it adds an extra layer of information. The 3 greens are 3 different regions of the world: North America, Asia, and Europe. So here we go. I centered on my final chart. This is my stacked bar. And then time to adorn it with title and subtitles. I didn't take the color scheme, but I took the inspiration here from The Economist. This is the same orientation they use, similar font proportions and data sources in the bottom left. And that's kind of where I got to. There's some other subtle choices about black dot, solid blacks, because I want this number to be the first one you see. And that was kind of me happy until this morning. And I thought, I prefer it vertical. And then I went backwards and forwards. I think my final answer is this one. I'm going vertical. I can't justify why, but that's good enough for me. And there you go. That is my rewake. Now, before I hand it back open for comments or to anybody else, which one of these is going to be viral and get success on Reddit and on Twitter? Well, of course it's this one. And the more I have looked at this chart, I love this chart. I think it's really effective. This is a deliberate approach to be thinking, if I was putting this in The Economist or the FT or in a business report or in a business dashboard, I'd be doing this one. So there you go. I went stacked bar. I kept the greens, but I'm not going to get clicks and likes in the same way the visual capitalists are.
Andy, just a shout out for your white lines in between your stacked bar sections that I know are one way to aid in accessibility actually on stacks. So
thank you. Yes. And
one of those things I've learned in all of the endless kind of reading and discussions about accessibility and data visualization are like small things I know I can do, even when tools provide other limitations. So kudos to you for those.
Yeah, thank you.
Andy, a couple of things. One is the comments that are all coming from Jeff. You'll notice there are initials at the end. Anytime any of us comment, they all look like they're coming from Jeff. So if you see ABM, that's from Amanda. If you see SW, they're from me. You're not going to see AC while Andy is pontificating. We also have a question. What is the presentation software that you use to create these wonderful...
this is PowerPoint. So I'm using the transitions are all the morph transition in PowerPoint, and the Spotlight comes from Steve, Jeff, and I's favorite piece of technology, the Logitech Spotlight kit, which is amazing and will transform your live and virtual presentations. If only I had a referral code, I'd be a rich man, because we've managed to inspire lots of people to buy them. Okay, last thing. I tried about 10 different colors of boundaries. Is there a green that's nice? Is there a dark green? Does it look better dark or white? Anyway, I went with white. All right. There you go. If there's no more comments, we can spin. Does anybody have a comment?
I think you should spin.
I should spin. which I think in English, that's an insult. I think you should spin. But well, I know what you mean, Jeff.
In England.
In England. Oh, yeah, in England. Yeah, excellent. Jeff, it's over to you.
Take it up. All right. Let's share this. Well, Andy already walked through the original. I will say that I had the same sort of reaction Andy did. I actually liked the Veroni for many reasons, but the half story was the one that I struggled with. You know, the United States looks like half a circle, just more than half a circle. And of course, if we look at their notation on it, you know, that seems to be the story that they're calling out, which is, you know, the U.S. alone made up more than half the amount. That's kind of the moral of their story. Of course, I tried a bar chart real quick just to see what the distribution of things look like. I did agree with Andy of trying to stay with the original message of them and really started to narrow it down. Then I just started looking at the problems of scale here that we have. You know, if you include all the small countries, that's your bars go to nothing. Your packed, you know, bubbles here really kind of show you just have lots and lots of small countries that don't really have much revenue. So it makes sense that they went with the top 10 because they sort of have this scale problem. I did the same thing that Andy did. I played with a stacked bar. I looked at it in a tree map, and I did like the tree map as well. The tree map showing half, a little bit more than half than the rest. I will point back again to the original as we're walking through this, though. They have 3 colors, right? And so there's really kind of a story of Asia versus Europe versus the United States, because they kind of color coded with the three colors. So I kind of played around with that. After I looked at I did exactly what Andy did. What do all the countries look like? But ultimately ended up back at just the story of the top 10. So that brought me into an interesting one, which is I looked at, what if I made a bar chart with a tree map in it, compared that the one is more than the others. And as Andy tried, I also looked at a pie chart. And the pie chart to me really tells if the main story is it's more than half, I don't think anything's going to beat that story right there, because a pie chart, easily you can see half of a pie, and this is more than half. So I started down this path, I guess. And, if we go back to the original again, I strayed away from the colors a little bit because I just wasn't crazy about the green. But I do want to take you to a white paper by Stephen Few called Save Pies for Dessert. And in his paper, there is a section called The Secret Strength of Pie Charts. And he talks about, I guess, a weird scenario where you're trying to compare A plus B versus C plus D. And if you're trying to make that comparison of A plus B versus C plus D, research that he found and cited in his paper, the pie chart was certainly better in that case. And he goes on and says, if you run into that scenario, maybe that's something you want to consider. I'm going to say this isn't really A plus B compared to C plus D. It's more A plus B greater than or less than C, right? It's the United States versus everything else. And I think that's their message here. And of course, a stacked bar, I think, does work in Andy's case. And in that case, my variation on it was more of a stacked bar tree map. I just kind of put the two together to show the biggest and smallest of those two. And I started playing around with the pie chart to give me the message of greater than half, which I think is the overall message for what they want to do. So with all that justified, and yes, my students are going to, give me a hard time at the University of Cincinnati, but I did create a pie chart, and this was my final. I did include the bar chart as a little highlight up there, just to, quick and easy make the comparison if you want. That allows you to see Asia versus Europe, the A plus B comparison against the US. But I think the overall comparison is really in the pie chart. Now, if this is on Tableau, I really like the clean pie chart, and I didn't think anybody needed to see the rest of the countries, but I will acknowledge in the original, they do have all that data. They didn't put percentages in there. They just used the dollars. So I hand chiseled, because Tableau doesn't like to rotate things. I did hand chisel some labels in there if I wanted them, so I could see that. Obviously, if I were putting this in static or print, I probably would just go with this. So I ended up with a pie chart, which is very rare for me. I don't use pie charts very often, but I think if the message is the United States is more than half, I think this is the easiest way to show.
I really like all the little adornments you've put. Again, the white borders, the sort of the border of the pie itself. Yeah, in the interest, it'd be really interesting. I find these exercises interesting if you list every single choice you make, and that's way beyond the scope of what we have here. But you can see all those little choices make a sort of difference. Looks great, Jeff.
By the way, I am guessing I had originally suggested that we box this, each spending at most an hour on this. And I'm seeing some stuff from Andy and Jeff that suggests maybe a little more than an hour. Don't know, just guessing.
Yeah, I clocked in at about 2 hours. I think I told you that on our rehearsal. I did break the hour rule.
I think my slides took me longer than
rule.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Andy. Did you follow the rule, Andy?
I think my slides took me longer than the chart. Or I think, and certainly the titles and labeling took me longer than making the charts.
It was in both cases. It was worth it just to see what you can do it, and also just the transitions that you had in yours, Andy, made for a really lovely story, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. All right, let's spin the wheel. Here we go. Is it going to be Amanda or Steve? we're looking at Amanda. I think it's going to be Amanda.
Maybe. Oh, excellent. All right.
Yeah, there you go, Amanda.
Thank you.
You're up.
All right. So starting with the same Voronoi tree map, I did hold myself to an hour. So I am going to just call it out there that I did hold myself to an hour in terms of chiseling through ideas. When I was looking at this tree map, the thing that I always see when I see these is that they feel like this kind of big part to whole comparison. And maybe it's the public health person in me and all of the nuances of COVID data from the last 2 years, but showing things that are proportional about the rest of the world in the title when you are showing only 10 countries in the chart really just kind of pained me a bit. But I did go ahead, and the first thing I did was to break it down into some kind of pie or donut to show what that looked like in terms of the overall comparison. And I think that for the kind of more than half, it makes logical sense. I also seem to have some of my numbers wrong on my sums, even though that's what was in my table. But comparing the bar chart and the stacked bar chart, I think makes, again, logical sense for the more than the total. But when I started to kind of play with this and go in a different direction, one of the things that I struggled with was looking just at the raw number and not as a share of total GDP. So looking at some kind of benchmark for how big these different economies are, because there's a piece of me that says, well, how unsurprised are we that countries like the US or China have really large numbers of military spend if we also have those countries that are kind of large economies in general? And so that just makes logical sense. So I went to the World Bank data page and I went ahead and pulled down the military spending as a percent of GDP data and knitted it in with the data about the overall size of the military spending. And just to stay in the kind of same thread as the Voronoi and keep things packed in a circle, I started playing with some circle packing diagrams, looking at the overall size of spend as the circle size, and then the coloring as the percent of GDP. And so I was really curious to see what that looked like when I'm looking at all of the countries and not just the top 10. If you pull that out separately, though, you can actually see a lot of the smaller countries better in terms of seeing the difference. And if you start to look at the overall comparison of the US versus the rest of the world in total, it is not equal to half, but it did make me think as I was looking at these side by side and pulling them apart, adding some labeling and understanding what these overall kind of percent numbers were and which countries were those dark circles so I could better see them. They started jumping out as some of the Middle East countries that have a higher percent of total spending in terms of total GDP. And so looking at that, I was harkened back to the slide from Matthew Kay, for anyone who was at Tapestry, about how awful we are at comparing the relative size of areas of circles in terms of figuring out the relative size of these two things and being able to guess if that United States circle, if you overlay it, is approximately half or a little bit bigger or smaller. And so maybe circles weren't the right way to go. And I wanted to start thinking through if we unrolled the circle into some kind of bee swarm plot, what that might look like. And you suddenly see, if you're looking at, I'm sorry for the overlapping legends at the bottom, but the total military spending as total money, that the US becomes this far outlier off to the right compared to all the other countries packed on the side. And so seeing all those other countries packed doesn't really help me a lot because there's just a lot to process there. And so what if we went ahead and unrolled that as percent of GDP in terms of military spending and sized our circles based on the overall total spend? So you still see that big bubble for USA, but you also see those other outlier countries that are further off to the right-hand side in terms of overall share, recognizing that I have diverted very far away from the core message of the visual capitalist circle, the visual capitalist Voronoi chart at this point. But then if we're looking at that, why don't we look at rank? If we're looking at position across a line, maybe what we care about is rank. And if you start looking at that information, only 2 countries rank in the top 10 for both total military spending and military spending as a percent of total GDP. And that is not the US, because the US actually ranks 16th when it comes to percent of GDP. And so as we go ahead and we look at these different pieces and we look at what the overall ranks were, I tried out a diverging bar chart that showed me both military spending as a total on the left and as a percentage of GDP on the right-hand side. So it's easier to see the relative lengths of those different lines in ways that you don't see when you're comparing the relative kind of darkness or luminosity of the green color on that unrolled chart that plots that information by position. And if I'm looking specifically at rank, though, and looking at that information and focusing on rank and focusing on it being ranked 16th, maybe I really just want 2 bar charts side by side that highlight where the US falls in the overall story of having the largest largest military spending, but actually ranking 16th in terms of overall military spending as a percentage of GDP. So I chose to go a slightly different route because I felt like the story that they were presenting was missing some data and some context. And so, while that may be a bit of a diversion from the visual capitalist, and I don't think any kind of paired bar charts are going to go ahead and again make the top list of the Reddit data is beautiful subreddit thread, I do think that it's important to think about context and about things like the overall size of an economy when we're making these different comparisons. It's a really easy headline to throw out there around the overall size, which is astronomically large for the US military spending. But when we start to benchmark that against something like the overall size of the economy, I think we start to see a slightly different story that adds some extra nuance. So there we have my example of unrolling things from a fact circle chart to a B-swarm plot and eventually over to a bar chart.
Well, Tim is having the same reaction I am. Thank you, whoever put that up.
Yeah, I love the GDP tank. I was actually going to divide it by population, figured, how much are you spending per person to defend the country? I thought that was an interesting look. But GDP, that's a great look. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, it's interesting the things you learn when you've spent a lot of times working with the World Bank data bank. For anyone who's looking at the hour, I knew exactly where I could go find this data set and use some pretty quick VLOOKUP functions to get me the data and the information I needed, which helped. And for the packed circle charts and those pieces, those were all built as SVGs and raw graphs really quickly. And then I went ahead and just did some minor editing and labeling in PowerPoint because you can now convert SVGs into editable graphics inside of PowerPoint. So that's the secret sauce, I suppose, underneath being able to do that kind of labeling and rework within an hour.
What's interesting, as soon as you started this little section and said you were going to go, oh, you still are, you were going to go down the path of bringing in the new data set, I thought, then we're going to end up with a slope chart. What was interesting was that the slope chart didn't look great, right? There was... perhaps, but it wasn't as interestingly visual as I thought it would be. I think that's always, that's something I've learned so many times over the years, that you can go, all right, we're going to compare two measures and a bunch of members. A slope chart. It's like, well, you've got to be driven by the data, because sometimes the right chart choice is let down by the data itself. So
I did go down the route of starting to figure out what a bump chart looking over the last 10 to 20 years would look like around rank. And that actually had just so much movement of different countries in and out of a top 20, for example, that it just didn't work really well. Like a bump chart works great when you have a subset of countries or things that are all kind of moving and you can see where they move. But when you have a lot of lines stopping and starting and moving in and out of things, it just doesn't make as much logical sense. So some of those kind of little examples and attempts did not make the cut and were not worth the data shaping after I gave it a quick pass with a few years of data.
Great. Mr. Wexler, we don't need to spin the wheel. It only has one member.
Well, we could still miss, if that little tick point, it doesn't quite go. So just so people know, there were two aspects to this whole exercise that made me uncomfortable. One was, are we amplifying good and reliable information or not? And I brought it up with all three of my colleagues. The source of this data comes from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. And can we trust this? Some forays into this, we looked at other data sources, and it suggests that this is pretty reliable. But outside of the exercise of is the Veroni the best way to do this, or how would you do this? I don't know if we should be amplifying this. Amanda, my guess is, since you went down this path of, well, let me look at the military spending and the GDP, you probably found some corroboration with the data that you were comfortable enough with it, that, this seems to test this is reliable and we can base some assertions on it. So that was one thing that concerned me. The other is, in producing the big book of dashboards or anything of value, it's usually not four people going into four corners and working separately. Someone comes up with an idea and say, hey, I'm working on this. Can you give me some feedback? And go, oh, hey, let me take a look at this and play with this a little bit. I think I have a different take. But it was fascinating to see what people came up with. And 1 hour, 2 hours is fine. I would hate to have seen it be 10 hours, because I think we would have come up with something better. So let me now share my approach to this. By the way, Andy, I like pie charts if they're done right. And the pie chart, I don't know anything that's better to show a part to the whole for one slice to everything else. Not 17 slices, one slice to everything else. But if I want to compare, well, how big is this segment compared to this segment? Nothing beats the bar chart, comparing length or position from a common baseline. So stealing like an artist, which is one of the things we suggest people do with the big book of dashboards. Let me share my, add this to the stream, here is something Jeff Schaefer put for the big book of dashboards, which is, hey, let me combine both of these things together and see this particular thing I'm interested, how big a part of the whole is it? And that is what I've done here with, call this the curated example, which is the United States spends more on military than the next 9 countries combined. And I can compare the bars. I can see, oh, look how big USA is compared to China, but I can also see that China is 3 or 4 times as big as India. And I can clearly see that the USA is more than 50%. I don't even have to have the friggin' numbers in here, as I can see that's more than half. So that works quite effectively. But taking a cue from, hey, here's the headline. The United States spends more on its military than the next 9 countries combined. That's a headline that you might get in New York Times, Financial Times, Washington Post, whatever. But if it's the live and interactive electronic version of these things, well, maybe somebody wants to just look at China by itself. Oh, I can see that's a little less than 1/4. Hey, how about China and India together? Oh, they make just less than 1/4. How about the bottom 5? So this has become my go-to of when I want to compare the segments and see the part to the whole relationship. The other thing I was curious about is, why did the visual capitalist just focus on the top 10 countries? Besides, why didn't they do everybody? And so I decided to combine everybody else and just see, and they make a large segment. And I'm guessing because saying the America's military is only 40% isn't as impactful or hitting you in the gut as saying it's more than half of the spending on military is from the United States. In fact, if you take all the countries into account, you can see that it's 40%. So I happen to be a pretty big fan of marrying these two things together, pie chart with the bar chart, and I got the idea from Jeff. One more thing I want to share with people, which is there's a really good use cases for Veroni diagrams, and Jeff gave a master class in this in Chart Chat 10, which I had the intelligence to look at again yesterday and was blown away by it. So I have this queued up. If you go to bigpic.me/cc10, you can see the whole explanation, where they're really useful, how they work, and it's a great 4 or 5 minutes. Your time will be well spent on this.
I think that was the moment when I got to learn from Jeff that the Jon Snow cholera map is not actually a map, but is a Voronoi diagram. Am I remembering that correctly? We talked about that then?
I think somebody created a Voronoi out of it. Yeah, somebody instead of I think he just mapped, the locations, and there were little stacked bars right on the map, but somebody created a Voronoi from his map that was really cool.
No, I think he did. I think he put, I'm pretty sure we'll have to go to our sources. I think what he iterated on the map, he had a segment,
because Jeff goes into it and goes into alternatives and things like that. It is well worth the 4 or 5 minutes. And have I ever lied to any of you? So trust me on this one.
Never.
All right. Any other comments on this, or shall we go to some quote unquote interesting charts?
I think I think we could talk about it maybe for hours, but whether to include the rest of the world or not is a very interesting choice, because I think Daniel Zvinker's talking about the Pareto principles, and I think because the tail is so long and so small, including them slightly dilutes the story. But I'm not going to. But I think it would be easy to argue against that as well. I was happy with just the top 10.
I think I struggled with their title because they very much make the title, and then in small text below, they say in the title of their Voronoi tree map, it says the US versus the rest of the world. And if you kind of ignore the rest of the text in the context there, I struggle a bit with that because I think it's a bit of a misleading title. It tells kind of the high level summary, but it does not tell you what's on the chart. Now, people should read charts. They should read the rest of the text around it for sure. But I don't know that I trust the world to do that.
If you go to the website, if you go to the website, you will notice that hang on, let's just pull it up. The headline of the blog post is correct, and the infographic is misleading. So that is something. At some point, they were like, "Oh, hang on, what are we actually showing?" And they had to make that decision. Possibly after they'd made the infographic.
Yeah, and then you wonder, I like the GDP measure. I also thought, I was going to do population, and then I was thinking, well, people don't equal necessarily your military spending, so maybe you do it by size of land, and then because a bigger country has more borders to protect or more land to protect. Yeah. But yeah, I love the context, Amanda.
And I just want to just make the statement again that America's military spending is 3.7% of its GDP.
America's military spending is, according to the World Bank database. Yes, I think you have that right. I would need to pull it up. Yeah, 3.74% of its GDP in 2020. So same year. Would be good to add the years on those titles there. Sorry about that. I mean, we have a really big economy, right? I mean, we have a really large economy, and so we spend a lot of money on our military. But I think if you look at what that looks like compared to the rest of the world, I mean, we're still in the top 20 for military spending as a percent of overall GDP, and so that's not insignificant by any means.
All right, we should.
Sorry, yeah, but Steve, we haven't mentioned there is the after. Don't forget, there is the after party at the end of the hour. We will transition to allow you all to join us if you wish to argue over our remakes, convince us you would have done something differently, or say should have been a Voronoi, should have been a pie chart, should have been a side-by-side bar. That's the after party.
Andy, thank you for the reminder. So, some interesting charts in the news. Here was a blog post from Alberto Cairo. Not surprisingly, Viktor Orban and his lackeys are shameless liars. Thread with charts. And well, what are these charts showing here? And we've got 2022, that bar is more than twice as big as the 2010. But if you look at the numbers, it's saying, oh, there were 3.6 million people working in 2010, and there are 4.7 million people working in 2022. That is not twice as large. And so that's the call out that's over here. Here was an interesting chart, and I was really flummoxed by it. And Jeff pointed out, actually, there's only one bar that's off. The scale starts at 0, and that's 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. That's 235. What's going on with this? I believe this is about illegal immigrants caught at the border and what's happening over time. So here's another one, which is, let's see. Oh, this is corporate tax rates have gone down significantly. And that is a pretty impressive decrease. It's not this really high, really low type of thing, but they are not showing, they're not even bothering to show what's on the value axis, where it starts, where it ends. It's just, it was high and look how low it is now. So yes, this is exactly what you would expect from autocrats in other parts of the world, except look at these charts that are coming from the White House. The recovery goes beyond jobs. This is a big increase in retail sales. And by the way, that is an impressive increase, but it's not more than twice as big. And that's because the value axis is not starting at 0, it's starting at 500. Then hey, gas prices are in fact coming down. And this looks like a pretty big decrease here. Well, again, you've got the value axes, over here, starting at $3.37.5. It's just gone down 2 cents. Jobs created by president, average per month. You can pick particular periods of time and either look fantastic or terrible compared to what was this other period of time that you're comparing. So yes, there have been a lot of jobs created because we're coming out of the pandemic when there were a lot of jobs lost. Trust me, a 50% decrease followed by a 50% increase is not going to get you back to where you were originally. And that's when Neil Richards first pointed this out to me. I thought he was talking about, the cherry picking of the time period. And wow, America's economic growth. And yes, there's a big increase because there was a disastrous decrease that was here. And I thought he was talking about the cherry picking, but in fact, there's something a little more pernicious at play. And with that, I will ask Jeff, do you want to take over from here?
Jeff, I think we need to hear your
I think you're muted.
There we go. Thank you. I think people probably saw the discussion online about it. It's really the y-axis, right, Steve, that is going in one increments up and down, and then all of a sudden randomly has a 5.5 on it. And I think the discussion online, it got me thinking is really, how does that happen? I think about a tool like Tableau, which by the way, I did recreate this in Tableau just to see if I could. Like, how do you break an axis like that in Tableau? And I'll tell you, that takes a lot of work to do. I mean, that is a discrete row with a Gantt chart just so you can label your 5.5 incorrectly. I mean, nobody would accidentally do that in Tableau or Power BI or even Excel. And so it really got me kind of thinking is like, well, what tool are people using to make it? And it strikes me that, some of us in the BI world, we don't hand chisel a lot of our charts. This is somebody who's probably hand chiseling something like Adobe Illustrator or PowerPoint, where they take a slide and they put it in PowerPoint, and then they manually change the label, right? They were thinking 5.5 in their head because the value is 5.7, and so that's how I imagine it happened. I don't think it was nefarious. I think it was probably just accidental, but it is just interesting to me that your choice of tool really kind of drives some of these things, because I don't think any of us using a Tableau or Power BI or even Excel would have made a mistake like that.
Interestingly, Robert Kosara posited that this was done intentionally to create a ruckus that people would be very upset about, because the increase is really impressive. And this 5.5, 4.0, 5.0, 5.5, 6.0, and the White House even responded with, this is why, just the letter Y, you need someone to proofread your charts before you publish them. And he thinks it was done intentionally so people would really look at this and go, well, the number is still a really big increase. I don't know if that's the case or not. But as Jeff points out, I think whatever tool you're using, you have to work to make this thing happen. That's not going to happen naturally.
I mean, I think about I pointed to some of my tooling being around using raw graphs and then doing a bunch of labeling and work inside of PowerPoint. When you actually convert a raw graph shape into raw graphs SVG into shapes inside of PowerPoint, there are layers to it that you have to actively work to ungroup and relabel and move things around, which I feel like is a little bit of proofing against accidental changes and moves. But I do think that, I don't think I have the same thought as Robert that someone deliberately went ahead and put this out there just to go ahead and make a correction. I don't think there was that much thought put to it. But I do think that it's one of those things that is easy to miss if you don't have someone actively doing a second look at your charts, which can be a really good reason to make sure you have a good chart proofreader before you're putting things out in the world from the White House's account.
By the way, anyone out there, if you can find the person responsible for this, interview them and find out if that was the case or not, I will give you my Logitech presenter, spotlight presenter.
Wow.
Okay, I will actually
You got a rad
sign the
one.
back of it. So if you can get that person, find out exactly what was behind this, and was it done to create a ruckus, or was it just oops?
I'm not going to get political on this discussion, but I just have to say I struggle at this point to get my mail more than 3 days a week, and so I think we give the government way too much credit. I don't think that was on purpose. I think that was just a happy accident. They're all busy.
Jeff, you only need one evil genius, one, to do something like this.
Can I just say there wasn't enough conversation about these vertically aligned labels, which were almost the biggest crime. I don't want to turn my head sideways when I read your charts. Please rotate them. Anyway, just shouting out for the vertical align haters. I'm one of them.
Someone else called out in the chat that one of the other challenges here is just the Ken pointed out that the big bubble label at the top has this visual impact that just makes that final bar just look a lot bigger than it actually is. And it's funny because I had the same thought about actually. I thought it was nice that they didn't try to put the floating heads right on top of the presidential bars around jobs, because that would have also been a bit of a distortion in terms of what the endpoints were of those bars. So I think that's a fair call out, Ken, in terms of the floating bubble of enthusiasm at the end.
So the messing with the value axes or doing this artificial elongation, this is something that all sides of the political spectrum engage in. That's what we've learned here today. All right, next up, I don't know if I don't even have a slide for it, is Iron Viz season. And we had a discussion amongst the four of us of the remarkable contributions and creations people have been making. And clearly, the amount of time it takes to do something like this, 50 hours, 100 hours, 120 hours, people are saying. And someone tweeted, oh my gosh, no one should have to spend, no one should spend that much time just to win a contest. And well, I'm going to open this up. I have my thoughts on this, but I'll open this up to Andy, Amanda, and Jeff. So is this time, is it foolish to put all this time and effort into this type of thing? And you're, what were there, 200 entries this year, and only 3 people are going to get to compete? Is this too much to ask for people to do?
I'll jump in first. I guess it's quiet there. I have obviously submitted myself a number of times, competed. I guess it was 2014, 15. I don't know what it was. Competed in the Iron Viz as one of the 3. I did not win. It's a lot of work, right? Like to create a Viz, we're talking about an hour of work for what we did in this redesign. And I probably spent more like 2 hours on that redesign. That was just a simple pie chart, right? You're looking at all the little details of it. When you're creating an Iron Viz entry, and I know, some of the people just, calling out, some people did music. They were coding in R and trying to get, stuff from music or colors from images. Like they could spend 20 or 30 hours of coding just trying to get their data set. What's interesting to me is that process of doing that stuff is a learning process, right? Like the community learns from it. Danushki, as an example, published one of my favorite visualizations, the Firebird years ago. And it was this beautiful animated Viz, and it won, Viz of the Year in the Vizzy Awards. And it was featured in the Information is Beautiful short list. A Viz like that didn't win, but yet look what came out of it. Everybody in the community now in data, music and data are publishing all kinds of things using that R code, and it turns into a lot of fun. So I think there's a learning opportunity as number one. And the second point that I'd make is it helps you elevate yourself. You're learning and you're building out your Tableau public profile page. You're putting things out there. You're going to see over the years, you're going to get better and better and better. I look at things I did 5 years ago, and I could certainly do that better today. So I think it'll help you build your Tableau public profile, and in a way that you can kind of see your progression, your timeline. And I think things can come from that, like meeting people and other things. I know Steve, that's how Steve and I met, right?
Well, this is Jeff's qualifier for the Iron Viz in 2014, I think it was the Quantify itself. I didn't know Jeff. I saw this thing and went, this is remarkable. And the guy is a musician, has a master's in music, and he's creating these resplendent data visualizations. I'm also a musician, and I don't think my stuff is nearly as resplendent. I've got to meet this guy and just say, just send out a fan letter and say, wow, I'm really enjoying the stuff that you're doing. And it led to a wonderful friendship and a fantastic collaboration. And I'm sure, Jeff, that took a long time to create that. My own submission, this is from 11 years ago. This is the friggin' Australopithecine era of Tableau. And this still holds up. Now, this easily took 60 to 80 hours. But I learned a ton about Tableau. I learned a ton about how people interact with stuff. They don't see the tabs up at the top, which is why there's a little arrow that says click here to go to the next thing. I also learned a great deal about the subject matter. It was time really well spent, and this has been kind of a centerpiece of my portfolio for a long time. So I learned a great deal, and yeah, you may not win the competition, and for sure it was way easier then, far fewer people, and not making things that are nearly as complicated, but you get out of it what you put into it. At least that was the case for me.
So I will say, as someone who has been lucky enough to be an Iron Viz judge, but has not submitted or competed on a stage or hosted on a stage, in Andy's case, in a very, very fetching suit. I think one of the interesting things that you called out, Jeff, is just the tech stacks that go into actually building out these kind of submissions. I think a lot of folks think of it as a Tableau competition. And I actually wish there was more discussion. And I know some of the blogs about process talk about this, about all of the different kind of tech stacks and tools and work that goes into the data shaping and data cleaning and the work in Figma or other design tools. Because one of the things I saw as a judge is that a lot of the different objects and elements and components that get brought into really visually compelling Iron Viz submissions involve building out additional layers outside of the tool, oftentimes with a more graphic design type lens. And so I think that there is something beautiful to that, and it's really interesting. I also think it can be really intimidating if you're somewhat new to using Tableau and you look at these kind of products and these kind of visualizations that get celebrated as kind of the canon of great examples. And it can feel like your efforts to go ahead and build some simple bar charts are functionally meaningless. And I know early on when I was using Tableau, I felt kind of like I didn't fit in with the whole Tableau crowd of people because I wasn't technical enough because of the kind of work that I was doing. And it took me a long time to kind of figure out where I felt like my place was in that community and the broader data viz community that didn't require being a really intense coder in some way, shape, or form, but having other strengths that I feel like I bring to the table.
It's amazing. I'll add a few things. First of all, I'm a judge and a host, so I'm not going to pass any judgment on anything other than we love seeing people's contributions. I have been blown away this year because the turnaround was fast following the previous Iron Viz, which was only just in November, and so amazing. First of all, the tweets about people spending 50, 100, 120 hours, that's a sample. We don't know actually what the distribution of people's time they spent on it is, so they might be outliers. We don't know. Also, you don't have to spend a lot of time on Iron Viz. We love entries that take 2 hours, right? Even just putting your toes in the pool is a great step forwards if you want to get involved in the community or develop your skills. However much time you can afford will develop your skills, as the others have said. We also, in these quantifications, we don't, of how much time we spend, we don't yet know whether people felt joy in that time or whether they felt they were begrudging that time. My sense is, again, from what you've learned from the other three, for a lot of people spending a lot of time on Viz, it's about that learning process. And, when you get in the flow of data production and data prep, it's amazing. So the process could be fun for all these people for 100 hours, and that's a huge win. Also, our strap line for Iron Viz is win or learn, you cannot lose. It's like, 3 people get to the final, 1 person will win, but it's just everybody else is going to learn. In fact, I see we have, I don't know what your name is, What the Viz. You are on the channel. Your YouTube channel is amazing. I know you just did a great video on how you use Tableau Prep to build help build your Iron Viz. It's a really good video, right? And that's another prime example of how all this time elevates the analytics community. So, you know, thank you to everybody for 1 or 100 or 200 hours in iViz. It's really, really amazing to see.
All right. Looks like we...
Jared. Hello, Jared. Sorry, Jared's just commented that's his name. Thank you for your channel.
So I just want to finish up with one element here. Give me a moment to get it queued up. And this was from the recently completed Outlier conference from the Data Visualization Society. I believe these videos will all be available soon. And the title of this was, "This Should Have Been a Bar Chart, The Joys and Dangers of Bespoke and Unusual Charts." And one of the key takeaways from it was that people got excited about was strive to present ordinary data in extraordinary ways. All right. And a lot of people latched onto that. Please watch this thing and see the context in which Robert is presenting it, because it does not mean my data is boring and unimportant. What can I do so people will look at it? And Robert gave 6 wonderful examples, 2 of which came from Gabriel Merit. And I just love these. One is longer hugs are more pleasurable than 1-second hugs. And notice still using the pre-attentive attribute of length to make an accurate comparison, but this is something that's going to stop and you're going to pause and you're going to think about it. And same with what is probably my favorite chart from 2021. If cows were a country, they would be among the top greenhouse gas emitters. But be careful and watch Kosara's video to make sure you understand the context, because otherwise you'll see stuff like this. Wow, this is really boring. It's just a bar chart showing the demographics of our survey results. I know, let's do something like this, which will take somebody 2 minutes to parse. They're not going to learn anything valuable. It is certainly more colorful and visually arresting, but they're not going to bother with you anymore because you just wasted 2 minutes of their time, which is why we are in fact giving this the scaredy cat icon, although some of you may know it as the screaming cat icon. Jeff, Andy, Amanda, anything you care to add to that? Because then I've got some plugs as well as URLs of the next chart chat and how you can join the after party.
Well, I will throw out there that all of the Outlier videos will be available on the Data Viz Society YouTube channel in about a month. So if you attended Outlier, you could have accessed them over the past week in the screening room on Sparkle, and they will all be on all the main stage talks on our YouTube channel. So we hope that you'll check them out, because Robert's is one of many really interesting, inspiring talks on everything from data sonification to these kind of practical questions about how we present information to topics around accessibility and equity in data visualization. So we hope you'll check them out.
Andy, Jeff, any other comments?
I don't.
No, I'm just ready to hear what people who want to attend the after party have to say to all these.
All right,
things.
my quick plug. I've got a brand new workshop next month. I've got 3 slots open, how to use data visualization to inform, engage, and persuade. The URL for it is over here, bigpic.me, CC BigPic. So know anyone that might be interested in this, check it out. And the next chart chat is March 17th. And the URL is bigpic.me/cc28. So please register, join us. I'm not sure what we have in the works. I'm also going to tell you about something. Put June 16th on your calendar. Can't tell you who we're going to have, what it's going to be about, but it's going to be really cool. Trust me. And again, have I ever lied to you? And please join us for the after party. bigpic.me/after27. That will do the equivalent of the giant Zoom link with the embedded password in it. So bigpic.me/after27. With that, I'm going to actually start that. I'm going to leave this to my colleagues to wrap things up over the next minute. It has been a pleasure to be with you all. I hope you will join us for the after party, and you can weigh in and let us know your thoughts. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks to everyone. And we hope to see you over in the after party.
Yep. Thank you.